All right. I'm ready when you are.
Hey, David.
Brent, how's it going? I loved reading the Revenue Acceleration Playbook, offering the forward to it. I mean, this book is great. I even love the cover of this book with the plays and so on. It's really, really great. Something I talk about a lot is how marketing and sales, especially on the web, really are converging. When a buyer goes onto the web and they're looking for an answer to a problem, they're looking for a particular type of product or service that they might be interested in. They're not interested whether this is marketing or this is sales. So maybe you could just share with us a little bit about what you're seeing around marketing and sales and how they're converging.
Yeah, no, I think you summarized that really well. And I remember in our very early conversations about getting you involved in the book as my book coach and kind of guide through this. One point of really strong connection was, yeah, it really isn't that big a difference between marketing, sales, and even customer success.
Yeah.
From a buyer or customer's point of view, we are all kind of brand ambassadors, so to speak. We represent the company, and what they want is a seamless experience that's picked up from one person to another. What they don't want to see is very obvious, like that, hey, I'm thinking about my function, I'm thinking about my stovepipe. And I remember a story you told early on, which comes up over and over again, is developed a great relationship with a salesperson. And then I was handed off to customer service or customer success. And the call starts with, yeah, tell me a little bit more about you and what you want to do with us.
Yeah, exactly. And there's the other part of that too, which is somebody gets really involved in the marketing content, for companies that haven't figured out how to combine all this. They're watching listening to the podcast, and they're checking out the blog, and then they click through, they become a sales lead. And then the salesperson is completely disconnected from the marketing content. And then, like you said, then if they become they become a customer, then the customer service is disconnected too. How should companies deal with this? What is your suggestion for the right approach to making sure that this is not going to happen to an organization, that they're speaking with one voice in a sense?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we, as you know, we tell a story in the book about you had connected me to Bob Ruffalo and Marcus
Yeah. Yep.
Sheridan, right, who are co-founders of Impact, which is a sales and marketing agency. And one of the things we use that story to tell is it's really important not to think about individual content assets, but to think more about content pathways. And we now talk about them as value plays, which is not your product, but how does your product drive value for customers? How does it help increase revenue? Better web capture, right? Better engagement with your leads. How does it help with, cost substitution or building your staff? An advisor can now reach 10x as many people. How does it help you use your manufacturing plant capacity? And what we see is companies often have all this content, but they haven't organized it around a value play, which is simply that value play is, okay, which success stories support each area of value? How would my customers describe it? What's the short testimonial or snippet? What are my thought leadership pieces that say I can add? So let's line it all up. And then to your point, it's now we prospect around, it's on our website, we prospect around it. It's the same content that our sales team uses. And I just, the way the Impact folks talked about it is you basically are inviting them into a value-added conversation around your content.
Right.
On the website, in prospecting, at the end of a first call, ask them to engage with some more content to show that they're interested and ready for prepping for the next call. So it's really important that you have the same content and that you create the expectation that content is a way of getting smarter about us so we can have a better conversation on both sides.
Makes total sense. One of the things that's so interesting about your book, I mean, it's right there in the title, is the concept of playbooks. And I think that in my experience with B2B selling, and I've been involved in B2B marketing and sales my whole career, 30 years. What I've seen again and again and again, still, even in the 2020s, what I've seen is companies that focus on their product. It's all about their product. Buy my product. Here's what our product does. It's feeds and speeds, and we're better than the other guys. The playbook approach is really, really different, as you write about it. I always tell people nobody cares about your products except for you. What they care about are themselves. What is a playbook approach for those who maybe aren't familiar with it? And then how is it different than a product approach? And maybe if somebody isn't using a playbook approach, what would be, outside, of course, of buying your book and studying it, what would be a way for them to get started with a playbook approach?
Yeah, no, great questions. And I think of, Mainstay, it used to be called AdmitHub, now it's called Mainstay, is a company we've worked with for a number of years. And I think of Kirk Delario there, who is one of the co-founders, and he came from the admissions world. He was, with the College Board and with a number of admissions offices. And I remember him saying, working with you, what the really switch was, I wanted to change the world, but I couldn't change the world until I stopped talking about my product.
Right.
Because my customers didn't care how they got better yield or how they got more first gen students engaged. That's what they cared about. If I had a way to do that, great. But first they wanted to know that I knew this was about getting more first gen students to college, and that we had a way of personalizing that engagement. And for first gen students, making it more private, honestly, because a lot of them don't feel comfortable sharing what they don't know about college. So it's that shift from not my product, as you say, but what value does my product drive for customers? So that's it. You got to have a value playbook. And then the reality is we know the go-to-market journey goes across the website, content, prospecting, sales, and deal velocity, closing and expansion, customer success and renewals. There are more than 24 plays in the revenue acceleration playbook. You cannot digest all of that by any means. So you got to figure out which are the one or two revenue outcomes that I care about the most, and then start to think about writing, if it's deal velocity, writing down, how do I do good early discovery to really get to a buyer success statement? How do I end every call with, we just did a blog post on the last 10 minutes, using that to qualify. So a playbook approach is then every phase of the buyer and customer journey, how do I structure that interaction to make sure I'm anchoring and re-anchoring on what the buyer values the most?
Makes total sense. So I'm thinking maybe even before a salesperson is engaged, many organizations have jumped on the whole content bandwagon, content marketing, if you want to call it that. I call it the new rules of marketing, but it's publishing great content like we're doing right now, creating a video discussion, or it could be released as a podcast, as audio only discussion, or people who create ebooks and white papers and all other sorts of content. But you talk a lot about how people are making a mistake and they're not targeting that content. Maybe talk a little bit about what you mean by that and what should they be doing instead?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And speaking of Mainstay, they have a new SVP of sales and was on just today with the SVP of sales and director of revenue operations on exactly this question, that when you have great content, you can take content engagement as a false trigger, right? Which is, hey, they want to buy my product. Well, maybe they might just be really interested in your thought leadership, right? Or they might have time in the day for a webinar. And so it goes back to this idea of content pathways. We always think of, great if they've engaged with your content. Now, can we use that content to qualify them into an ideal buyer profile? and buyer persona? Can we think about, they've engaged with content, put them in a cadence, put them in a drip cadence with good questions, with good content, with peer stories, and see if they keep moving closer. Okay, yes, they fit an ideal buyer profile. They're engaging with our evidence, our social proof that we can solve a problem, invite them into a value-added conversation around that problem. And now you have much higher confidence that that content is actually surfacing a need that you might work on.
Cool. You mentioned buyers and buyer personas a couple of times in the last few minutes. Maybe you can dig in a little bit there. When I talk to B2B marketers and B2B sellers, they're frequently not thinking about the different characteristics of buyers. What would be your suggestion for how B2B companies should be focusing on this? And then once they have thought about how to focus on, how can they implement that within your playbooks structure?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, you've been kind of leading the charge in marketing thinking and I think you actually know the person well who coined that term, buyer persona. And it's a really powerful concept, right? Is that a buyer has a persona, they have a walk that they do every day that you got to lean into. That's the basics of buyer empathy is, buyer, where are you today? And what are you thinking about and what pains? And it's a really powerful concept. What we encourage is to think about the intersection between your value plays and your buyer personas. And I'll give an example of NECI. It's a local company here who does manufactured energy solutions for manufacturing companies. And if you're thinking about a buyer persona, you're going to the manufacturer, let's just call it the production manager or the maintenance manager, and you're thinking about a pump, right? You're thinking about a maintenance problem. If you're thinking in a value play concept, the question is, who cares about maintenance? Who cares about planned maintenance? Who cares about production throughput? Because the maintenance manager cares about that because he's got a maintenance and reliability goal, but the plant manager cares about that because they have a production goal, and the VP of operations across the region cares about that because they have an overall economic goal. So we literally
and the financial people, the accountants and so on, CFO, they have something completely different too.
100%. So we always say personas are really powerful. You have to know them, but think about your personas, line them up to your value plays. And when you line them up to your value plays, now you can prospect around the intersection of value plays. And when you get to a second or a third conversation, you already have people lined up on, this is about planned maintenance. This is about a corporate goal for higher throughput production. It's not just about a pump or a filter or a maintenance problem.
So would you have any advice to people about buyer personas in terms of how many they should have? There's some people say, geez, I've got thousands of buyer personas. And other people say, I don't want to deal with buyer personas. I'm going to just market myself the way I've always marketed it. How should they be thinking about how to slice and dice this?
Yeah, so our recommendation is always, if you think about every value play that you have, is who is the key user buyer for there. And I'm using a Miller-Hyman term, which is a powerful idea that there's an end user for, again, going to NECI. If you have a maintenance value play, a quality value play, a production, an energy, a safety one, there's a single end user for that. So that's number one. Number two is who writes the check, right? Who is your economic buyer? And then there could be a bunch of other influencers, but often you're better off leading with who's going to use it, who's going to buy it. And then who are the influencers? The influencers, you sort of, less priority. So I think it's less how many and more just at the end of every one of your value plays, there's a user and a buyer.
Cool. Makes total sense. Something else you talk about, which is super interesting, is the importance of customer voice in modern selling. Maybe you can share with us what you mean by that and how people might be able to implement that concept in the way that they're selling today.
Yeah, so two quick stories on that. One, I was just on with a group. We read a story about Parsable, which is also in the manufacturing space, but has a handheld device that automates paper-based processes, whether that's shift changeovers or quality processes. And the story we tell in the book is they let their first customers in every new sector basically tell them what the right language was and right use cases. So Coca-Cola in bottling manufacturing, different set of pains and use cases than paper and pulp manufacturers, different than their logistics users. And so they were very intentional about what words that they use to describe our impact. How did they describe our use cases? Roll that up and sell it forward. We just have a revenue leader story coming out with Beth Nelson at Plus Delta Partners. They sell the exact same product into four different types of fundraising groups. Large, research universities, mid-sized colleges and universities, hospitals, and nonprofits. Again, following the buyer voice, the way they message it, totally different messaging frame. For mid-sized universities, it's basically, we're going to build a team-based training approach, everybody on the same fundraising. A research university of 400, you're not going to get everybody in. So it's a cohort-based model. We're going to look for best practices, one team at another. Medical, the team is, how do I get fundraisers and docs who can be a little bit arrogant when it comes to fundraising, working together effectively? Nonprofits is, how do I get my fundraising and my board working better together? Same product, messaging the problem in 4 different ways to get resonance with new buyers in each of your target markets.
Got it. And would it make sense then to have sort of examples of each of those so that you're getting authentic customer voice? And perhaps that could be part of the content marketing as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great instinct. And we say, when people say, well, how do I start? We say, think about your different target markets, pick 3 to 5 top customers and go interview them. How would they describe your outcome, your impact? What's the pattern? And honestly, if you can't find 3 to 5 customers, that may not be a target market, or your product may not have enough of an impact, right? So could surface other problems, but I think your instinct is exactly right, which is, in each one, get your customers telling you, what does that tell you about your content that you should use? The testimonials, the snippets, et cetera, that will be most impactful in engaging other buyers in the segment.
Cool. One of the things I said in my foreword to the Revenue Acceleration Playbook is that this idea of playbooks is truly a remarkable and important concept. And I've never really seen something that's that simple in terms of, here's the play for this, here's the play for this, here's the place for this. Maybe you can share an example of a play, maybe with a little bit of detail, perhaps something about anchoring buyer value.
Yeah, so it's a great question. We had a recent post on this. Is we say people need to rethink, what is good buyer discovery? We all have heard of customer-centric selling or consultative selling. So everybody asks questions. Often that can be frustrating to a buyer because they're like, you asked me a bunch of questions and then you didn't use the information, or you talked about something else. So we always say good value discovery is get to a success statement, right? Get them to, what are you working on? What's keeping you from being as successful as you want to be? And what would success be to you if we were working together in 6 months?
And so just to be clear, I'm jumping in here for a second, just to be clear, this is for one buyer discussion. We're not talking about in general as a buyer persona, but you're talking now to one particular buyer and you're trying to get them to tell you that, right, for them.
Exactly, because every buyer is going to have a slightly different success statement. We want to hear it in their words, right, and play it back to them.
Got it.
And so the play is, okay, what are our right goal questions, gap questions? What's keeping you from goal? And then success questions or impact questions. What would be success for you? And everybody could have a slightly different way about asking about success. You know, what did you see in what I just shared with you that you would implement first? What jumps out at you first? If we were to work together, Chris and Brenna, who I've worked with for 6 years and 3 engagements, if I were to wave a magic wand and you had this, and in 12 months, what would be your ideal future state? I remember Drew, the folks at Mainstays, like, what would be your touchdown dance? Right? If we were to work together in 6 months, what would get you dancing in the end zone? So
what would get you to open a big bottle of champagne and pour it around to your teammates?
Love it, right? It's you're helping them think about an ideal future state that would get them excited to work with you, because selling is hard. Inertia is our number one obstacle, doing nothing. Because to buy something, I got to do something different. I got to pay for the privilege of doing that. So you have to create a vision for them about a better future world, and you need to guide them with some type of success statement. I'm going to add that to the repertoire. What would get you to open a bottle of bubbly and pass it around the table? I love it.
What a great way to end a fabulous discussion, is hoisting the virtual champagne and having a little bit of a sip. The book, The Revenue Acceleration Playbook, is totally great. I wrote the foreword. I'm David Meerman Scott. The author is none other than Brent Keltner. Brent, thanks for writing the book. Thanks for this little discussion. And I can't wait to see what people will say about this book when it's released. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful addition to all of the literature on sales, and will open people's eyes about a new way to sell, one focused on playbooks.
Yeah, thank you, David. Have loved the collaboration, and thanks for a great call today. Thank you. Stop recording.